A little girl fell from a mountain. Nobody expected her to survive. Witnesses believed the worst had happened. But what happened next became one of the most famous miracles associated with the Sanctuary of Tindari. And centuries later, people still travel from around the world to the very place where it happened. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what rescuers discovered below the cliff changed the history of this sanctuary forever. And it may leave you asking the same question people have asked for generations. How did the child survive? To understand the mystery, we first need to travel to one of the most breathtaking places in all of Italy. High above the sparkling waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea stands the Sanctuary of Tindari, perched dramatically on a rocky promontory overlooking the coastline of Sicily. It seems almost suspended between earth and heaven. Visitors often describe their first sight of Tindari as unforgettable. The sea stretches endlessly into the distance. Golden sunlight dances across the water. The wind carries the scent of salt and wildflowers, and above it all stands the sanctuary, majestic, peaceful, timeless. For centuries, pilgrims have climbed these heights seeking hope, seeking healing, seeking answers. Many arrive carrying burdens too heavy to explain. Others come simply to pray. But almost everyone who visits eventually finds themselves standing before the sanctuary's most treasured possession, a mysterious statue known as the Black Madonna of Tindari. Her dark face has fascinated visitors for generations. Her story has inspired devotion throughout Sicily and beyond. And around her image, countless testimonies have emerged. Stories of protection, stories of healing, stories of unexpected grace. Some visitors arrive skeptical, others arrive convinced. Yet nearly everyone leaves carrying a story. And among all the stories connected to Tindari, one continues to stand above the rest, a story involving a child, a mother, a cliff, and what many believe was a miracle. The story began on what seemed like an ordinary day. Pilgrims had gathered at the sanctuary. Families walked through the courtyard. Children laughed and played beneath the Sicilian sun. The atmosphere was joyful, peaceful. Nothing suggested that within hours people would witness an event that would be remembered for generations. Among the visitors was a mother traveling with her young daughter. Like countless parents before her, she had come to pray, to seek comfort, to place her family under the protection of the Blessed Mother. Perhaps she expected the day to end with photographs, prayers, and memories. Instead, it would become the most terrifying day of her life. Imagine her standing there, the sea shining below, the sanctuary rising above, her daughter nearby. Everything normal, everything safe. Then suddenly, something changed. The child moved toward the edge, too quickly, too unexpectedly. Before anyone could react, a scream shattered the peaceful afternoon. People turned, the mother turned, and in an instant her world stopped. Her daughter was falling, not stumbling, not slipping, falling beyond the protective area, toward a steep rocky drop that descended toward the landscape below. Witnesses watched in horror. Some froze, others shouted, several rushed forward. But nobody could reach her in time. The child disappeared from sight. And then came the silence. That terrible silence that follows a tragedy. The kind of silence that tells everyone the same thing. This cannot end well. The mother collapsed in panic. People gathered around her. Some began praying immediately. Others ran toward the paths leading down the cliffs. Everyone feared the same outcome. The drop was enormous. The terrain below was unforgiving, and no one could imagine how a small child could survive such a fall. Yet nobody knew what rescuers were about to discover, and what they would find would leave witnesses speechless. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The shock was too great. The reality too terrible. One moment, a little girl had been standing beside her mother. The next, she had vanished beyond the edge of the cliff. Then panic took over. People began shouting. Others ran toward the pathways that wound down the steep hillside. Some called for help. Others prayed. The mother could barely breathe. Every terrible possibility rushed through her mind at once. She imagined the rocks below, The impact, the injuries, the unbearable thought that she might never hold her daughter again. Witnesses later recalled the fear that spread through the crowd. Nobody expected good news. Nobody expected a miracle. They simply hoped to find the child. As quickly as possible, the sanctuary stood high above the sea. Beautiful, majestic. But from that moment forward, every person looking over the edge saw something different. Not beauty, danger. The drop was steep, the terrain below uneven and rocky. Even experienced adults would struggle to descend safely. Yet somewhere below was a frightened little girl. Or so they hoped. Rescuers and volunteers hurried down the narrow paths. Some moved cautiously. Others rushed despite the risk. Time felt painfully slow. Every minute seemed like an hour. Above, the mother waited. Helpless, listening, watching, praying. Imagine being in her place. Unable to help. Unable to see. Unable to know. Forced to wait while others searched for the person you loved most in the world. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. People gathered around her. Some tried to comfort her. Others joined in prayer. Many looked toward the sanctuary itself. Toward the Black Madonna. Toward the image that generations had trusted during their darkest moments. And perhaps that is what made the atmosphere so powerful. This wasn't simply an accident. It was unfolding in one of the most sacred places in Sicily, a place already surrounded by stories of faith and protection. Yet nobody dared assume a miracle had happened. Reality suggested something else. Reality suggested heartbreak. The search continued. Men called out the child's name. Again and again. No answer. They searched among rocks, among bushes, along dangerous slopes. Still nothing. The silence became increasingly frightening. With every passing minute, hope seemed to fade. The mother wept. Witnesses prayed, and deep down, many feared they already knew how this story would end. Then suddenly, someone shouted. A voice echoed from below. People stopped. Another shout followed. This time louder, excited, urgent. The searchers had found something. Everyone strained to hear. The mother stood frozen, her heart racing. What had they discovered? Was it bad news? Was it confirmation of everyone's fears? Or something else entirely? The rescuers moved closer, and what they saw made no sense. The child was there, alive. Not only alive, calm, safe. The little girl who should have suffered devastating injuries was sitting in a patch of vegetation far below the cliff. Witnesses could hardly believe their eyes. Rescuers could hardly believe theirs. Again and again they checked. Again and again they looked around the area, trying to understand, trying to explain, trying to find a natural answer. Yet the more they looked, the more impossible it seemed. The distance was enormous. The terrain was unforgiving. The fall should have ended very differently. And yet there she was, alive, conscious, protected. News spread quickly. The mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. When she finally saw her daughter alive, emotions overwhelmed everyone present. Relief, joy, disbelief, gratitude. People cried openly. Others embraced. Some fell to their knees. Many immediately began speaking of the Black Madonna of Tindari. Had she protected the child? Had something extraordinary happened on that cliff? Or was there another explanation no one had yet discovered? The question spread almost as quickly as the story itself. But one thing was certain. Nobody who witnessed that day would ever forget it. And as word traveled beyond Sicily, more and more pilgrims began arriving at Tindari, not simply to admire the view, not simply to visit the sanctuary, but to stand where the impossible seemed to have happened, to see the cliff with their own eyes, to ask the same question people still ask today. How did the child survive? And strangely enough, the story was only beginning. Because the miracle of the cliff would transform Tindari into something much greater than a beautiful sanctuary overlooking the sea. It would become a place of hope for families across generations. The story spread far beyond the sanctuary, far beyond Sicily. Far beyond the people who had witnessed it, parents told their children, pilgrims shared it with friends, travelers carried the story home, and with every retelling, one question remained at the center of it all. How did the child survive? Some searched for practical explanations. Others believed they had witnessed divine protection. But regardless of what people believed, the event became forever linked to the Sanctuary of Tindari. And as the years passed, something remarkable happened. The miracle of the cliff became more than a story. It became a symbol of hope, a symbol of protection, a symbol of a mother's prayer being heard when all hope seemed lost. Perhaps that is why the Sanctuary of Tindari continues attracting visitors from around the world. Because every person who arrives carries something: a fear, a dream, a burden, a prayer. Some come seeking healing. Some come seeking peace. Some come seeking answers. And many come seeking something even more personal: the gift of a child. Over time, the Black Madonna of Tindari became especially associated with families, with motherhood, with children, with the hopes and fears that only parents truly understand. Many couples who struggle to conceive travel long distances to pray before the Black Madonna. Some arrive after years of disappointment, years of waiting, years of wondering if their dream of becoming parents will ever come true. They light candles, they kneel in prayer, they place their hopes before the Madonna, and then they return home. For some, the answer comes quickly. For others, it takes years. But what makes Tindari unique is what happens afterward, because many families come back, not to ask, but to thank. Visitors often see parents carrying newborn babies into the sanctuary, tiny children dressed in white, mothers holding infants close to their hearts, fathers wiping tears from their eyes. Families returning to the place where they once prayed for a miracle, returning to say thank you, returning to place their child under the protection of the Black Madonna. Generation after generation, year after year, the tradition continues. And perhaps that tradition explains why Tindari feels different from many other pilgrimage sites. The sanctuary is not merely a destination. It is a living story, a story still being written, a story carried by thousands of families, a story of gratitude, of protection, of hope. And standing there today, looking out over the sea, it is easy to understand why. The view itself feels almost unreal. The blue waters stretch toward the horizon. The cliffs rise dramatically from the coastline. The sanctuary stands proudly above it all, silent, watching, waiting, much like it did on the day that little girl disappeared over the edge. Imagine returning to that moment. The scream, the panic, the desperate search, the unbearable uncertainty, the mother's tears, the crowd holding its breath. And then, the discovery: the child alive, safe, protected. The impossible becoming reality. That is the moment people remember. That is the moment people tell their children about. That is the moment that transformed an accident into a story that would endure for generations. Was it coincidence? Was it luck? Was there an explanation nobody understood, or was it something more? Each visitor answers that question differently. And perhaps that is part of the reason the story has survived for so long. Because it leaves room for wonder, room for reflection, room for hope. Whatever conclusion you reach, one fact remains undeniable. A little girl fell from a mountain. Nobody expected her to survive, yet somehow she did. And centuries later, people still travel from around the world to the very place where it happened. Not merely to remember the event, but to remember what it represents. The possibility that hope can survive even when everything seems lost. The possibility that protection can arrive when we least expect it. The possibility that some stories are simply too extraordinary to be forgotten. And perhaps that is the true miracle of Tindari, not only that a child survived, but that her story continues inspiring faith, gratitude, and hope in countless hearts to this very day. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment in life that felt impossible to explain? A moment when everything seemed lost, yet somehow things turned out differently than expected? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you enjoy discovering the miracles, mysteries, and extraordinary stories hidden behind the world's most famous shrines, don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey, because there are many more remarkable stories still waiting to be told.